Black like me. Black like me. Black like me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Hey, good people. Welcome back to another exciting episode of Black Like Me podcast with Dr. Alex G. And so glad that you're part of this podcast. And I can't believe it, but we're at the end of another season. So this is the last episode of season 5. And I have really saved the best for last. I've been wanting to have this guest on as long as I've had this podcast. And I say that in all honesty. And so my guest today is none other than Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, who is an educational pop icon. One of my colleagues was in town for an educational conference. And he said to me, you know, G, y'all just act like Dr. Ladson-Billings is just like run-of-the-mill, professorship. He said, you need to understand that in our educational world, she is Beyonce. And I love that. I've never forgotten that. So that being the case, I'm going to put a link to her full bio in the show notes because one, I consider her a dear friend and a mentor, a leader in our community, a brilliant researcher, a theorist, educator, and I like to give props to people who do great work. I will say, for the sake of contextualizing our conversation, she's got a fantastic Wikipedia page. It refers to her as an American pedagogical theorist and teacher educator. She's the former Kellner Family Distinguished Professor of Urban Education at UW-Madison's Department of Curriculum and Instruction, really known among so many other things of culturally relevant pedagogy and critical race theory. Critical race theory. Among so many of Dr. Ladson-Billings, and I'll let her clean it up any way she wants to. So much of Dr. Ladson-Billings' work is out there, but from 2005 to 2006, she served as the president of the American Educational Research Association, the author of 5 books, contributing to about 2 others. She's authored selected articles. She has contributed chapters to other books and chapters to texts that have been edited. But I love the fact that she is a community activist. She is a lay leader within her faith community and really models what it means to be in the academy, in the community, advocating for the rights of all folks, but particularly that of Black people. And there's so much more that I can go on and say. That's what I'm putting in the show notes. But Dr. Ladson-Billings, I'm so happy that you're on Black Like Me. Thank you for being my special guest and for being my cleanup hitter for season 5.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm actually your neighbor, right? It took you this long to get to me, and we're neighbors. Come on.
Yes, ma'am. I was trying to find just a good reason to get you on. I tried not to line up all the people I know, so I'm trying to spread them out honestly. But so I've been so excited about this. And so, there's a number of things I want to talk to you about, but I got to get to my Black icebreakers first, Dr. Ladson-Billings. And so I love having people. Now, you're from Philly, so that's not the South, but it's an urban area. So I'm trying to see how folks in Philly might have been socialized similarly to folks like from Chicago. My mother's from Southeast Missouri. So the first one's easy, Dr. Ladson-Billings. Are you a grits or cream of wheat kind of person?
They're not even in the same category.
Please do tell.
Grits, okay?
Yes,
grits. Ma'am. No, there's nothing else. Grits.
That's right. They're in a category all alone. Why am I even wasting time putting it in a category with cream of wheat? That's ridiculous. So I'm just curious, with your grits, with your standalone grits, do they stand with salt and butter, or do they stand with sugar and butter? And answer, Dr. Gloria, answer carefully.
I know y'all like to put sugar, but I'm sorry. It is butter, salt, and pepper. Grits is a corn. Do you take your corn on the cob and sprinkle sugar on it? It's the hominy from the corn. I'm just trying to get y'all to think about this, right?
Just butter, salt, and pepper, just like an ear corn.
Just like you do ear corn. corn.
Gotcha. I've been, man, for all these years, all these many years.
Sugar
Oh my
belongs on that cream of wheat.
Yes, ma'am. I'm not. Listen, Black Like Me. I guess you can tell I'm not going. Listen, usually I'm lippy. I am not going to be lippy with Dr. Gloria. This is not no. So y'all just need to understand. I've been trained well, no, I'm not going to do that. I might take on some of my elder brothers. I'm not going to take on Miss Gloria, Dr. Gloria. So
I
next,
will say, however, though, even though I'm from Philadelphia, my roots are actually from South Carolina. Both of my parents are from South
from
Carolina.
South Carolina. All right. Okay. No. Okay. That's great to know. Do you remember what day of the? Now these are easy. I'm just throwing you these easy ones. Do you remember what day of the week Soul Train came on?
Soul Train came on Saturday.
wait, Dr. Gloria, was that during cleanup time for you too? Like, did your family clean up during Soul Train?
Listen,
did y'all stop to dance?
We was done by Soul Train.
oh, you have to be done by Soul Train.
Done by Soul Train. We had to get up early, or as my mother would say, soon in the morning. I see y'all soon in the morning.
I love it. Oh my goodness. Now, I'm Carolina or Philly, but did you have friends who could help you finish this sentence? I ain't got to do nothing but stay black and
die.
And die.
Stay black and die.
I said that in church one time. Stay black and die. It's so funny because I talked about cultural norms and I said, non-black people watch this. I said, black folks, finish this sentence. I ain't got to do nothing but stay black and they all said die. And so again, our white members just started laughing like, how do black people know this? And that's the purpose of Black Icebreakers, is just to show the strength of some of those cultural norms and things that tie us together. I love that. Those are only two things that were for sure: blackness and death. Everything else was negotiable. Now this one, Dr. Gloria, I don't typically ask people on the show, but did your parents or grandparents use the phrase GP? Like, if you don't stop doing something, I'm gonna get you on GP. My grandmama said it. My mother said it a few times. Did you hear that phrase? And I was in my 30s or 40s when I found out what GP was, but it's general principle.
General principle.
Doesn't that go back to slavery? I mean, I remember hearing some professor saying, I think it was Dr. Clark Pujara, saying that slave owners used to go and punish slaves on GP. That means you didn't do anything wrong. General principle.
You didn't have to have a reason.
You would just do it. And it just means I'm just going to do it because I got the power. But my family, yeah, okay, good. I just wanted to know, okay, this is so interesting. Just a couple of others that I don't get to ask folks because I'm realizing the younger generations don't get any of these questions. Do you know what a face bowl is? Did your family ever refer to, my grandma?
It's the basin in the sink, right?
Yes. My grandmama called it a face bowl.
Yeah, with which you used a washcloth.
That's next. If you don't need a face bowl if you're not going to use a washcloth. So washcloth and the face bowls go together.
Right.
Oh man, I love it. Okay, I love this. I love folks who got roots and I never did this, but Jackie's family. Jackie grew up in Chicago, but her family was in Alabama. So they would often take long road trips. But they would talk about how they would take a shoebox and line it with aluminum foil to put like chicken and things in it,
or wax paper, which is cheaper. You don't waste aluminum foil.
Oh, okay, but use wax paper.
But she was bougie. She was bougie putting that aluminum foil in there. Or excuse me, tin foil.
That's what it was called. It took me a while to realize it was aluminum foil, but that's because depending on where you stopped riding a bus or in your car going south, Black people couldn't go into restaurants necessarily. So that was sort of their little thermos box or something, Dr. Gloria?
Right. Yeah. So that box, it's interesting because the last time I had such a box, I was actually leaving from New York because I used to go vacation with my great aunt. I was terrified of being in the South. So they would send me north. And she sent me home on the bus, in the Greyhound bus, with a shoebox of chicken and I believe some pound cake, something else. But the chicken had just been recently cooked, so it was smelling. And I was sitting next to a Puerto Rican man. I was 14. And this man, he had a bag of fruit. And he said, would you like some fruit? I said, no, thank you. He
You
said,
knew
are
better.
you sure? I said, no, I'm good. I got something. He said, you know, you're welcome to it. It took him about 3 times before I said, oh, would you like some chicken? And he said, I sure would. So,
I thought you never asked, girl. Oh, I love this. I love this. Let me see. I think I've got just one more for you, Dr. Gloria. What was the ritual for your grandmothers or your parents when it was thundering and lightning outside? Was there a ritual? Just tell me a little bit about the storm ritual for your family, if you remember it.
so no electric appliances on, no lights, no TV,
Yes.
and you couldn't use the telephone. You
You
needed
could
to
not get on
go,
that phone.
could you get on the phone? You had to go sit down and be quiet because
Tell them why,
God,
Dr. Gloria.
God was doing his work.
Mm,
So you know, you're not supposed to be around interrupting it. Just sit down till he finished doing his work.
oh my goodness. Man, I love this. I think part of this, Dr. Gloria, is in understanding all the atrocities that our Black people have been through in this country. It has not choked out culture and storytelling and all of our cultural norms. And whether someone is from South Carolina or Philly by way of South Carolina or Southeast Missouri, which is where my mother was raised, or Chicago, I've even asked these questions to West Coast Black folks. I love the way people take their time. And they said, just like you, Dr. Gloria, turn off everything. Some people would cover a mirror, sit down, be quiet, because God is at work. And don't let it be raining and the sun is shining. Don't let it be
Oh,
raining.
now what do you call that?
The old folks, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, they would say the devil was beating his wife.
Devil's beating his wife.
And so every time I ask this and someone else answers, I think this wasn't just my family. Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings' family was talking about this in South Carolina, in Philly. I love the fact that Black folks carry culture in our bones, and it's why it's been able to sustain us. And so many of our white guests who listen, Dr. Gloria, I love the fact that we have these stories that tie us together. And I think many of them listen and they lean in to say, is this Black person going to really get it? Like, could all these Black people have these same answers to these same things? And you all are hearing it. But for me, it's comical because I love the stories around
right.
it.
And when we break cultural norms, it's disconcerting. Yes. I often tell the story of as a 17-year-old, because I was 17 when I went to college. I decided that I was going to spend Thanksgiving at my roommate's house, which was a taboo, was verboten. I was supposed to come home, but you know, I'm grown now. I go to college. So I went to her house. She lived in Baltimore, and her family had a Thanksgiving dinner that was similar to every Thanksgiving dinner I've ever had. Roast turkey, cornbread dressing, okay, not herb, not oyster, cornbread, candied yams, baked macaroni and cheese, not crabs, collard greens, cornbread, cranberry sauce. I mean, it was identical to every Thanksgiving dinner I'd ever had, except there was a bowl of sauerkraut on the table. And I said to her under my breath, because I'm there with her family, what is that? And she said, well, sauerkraut. I said, I know it's sauerkraut, but what is it doing on the table? And she said, well, you always have sauerkraut at Thanksgiving. I said, no, you don't. She said, yes, you do. I said, no, you don't. And we went back and forth under our breaths. Yes, you do. No, you don't. No, you. I mean, that little bowl of sauerkraut bothered me so much that when I got back to my dorm and my mom called and how was your little Thanksgiving dinner with your friend, you know, because I've already done the wrong thing.
Miss Grown thing.
Right. And first thing out of my mouth was, Mom, guess what them people had? I didn't talk about any of the rest of the meal. It was that sauerkraut. Now that's a Maryland thing. And it just really, it worried me to no end because it was not something I was used to seeing. So yeah, we have our ways, you know.
We certainly do. And I love the way it holds us
Mhm.
together. You know, Dr. Gloria, I've been looking through just articles you've written, just what is just what is critical race theory and what's it doing in a nice field like education, developing university settings, developing critical perspectives for teaching in a democratic and multicultural society. I'm here for the hard reset. I love this title, Post-Pandemic Pedagogy to Preserve Our Culture. Um, who you call a nappy-headed, a critical race theory, look at the construction of Black women, the needs of our new teachers. These titles are provocative. They sound like sermons. It's just, the depth, the breadth of your scholarship and your insight is amazing, but I think it is only surpassed by the relevance of your work and how relevant it continues to be to this day. Season 5 for this podcast, Dr. Gloria, has been centered around the question, now what? So many people were thinking the Trump era was about to end, and this started after the election. We had a woman of color as vice president. Biden was in the office, a different administration, and a lot of our white colleagues and probably some Black colleagues, but mainly non-Black colleagues, wanted to exhale and say it's a new day. No, the Mad Hatter isn't tweeting. But I kept saying, no, you can't let up off the gas now. You got to keep pressing. It's during this time that people are planning their comeback. They're like, oh, so y'all gonna have a Black president, and then you're gonna swing back and bring a woman up in here as a vice president who's, from South Asian and, and Black descent, and what's going on to our country. And so I've been trying to keep people on their toes and understanding we've got to keep watch. We've got to keep voting and getting ready now for the next elections. And we have just seen since the Capitol, since the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, so many things have happened. If I had $1 for every time I've heard someone say CRT or critical race theory, I'd buy more hours for my podcast. And so just because of your scholarship in this area, your interest in this area as it pertains to education, I just wanted to wrap up this season by just having a talk with you, ma'am, around some of these things and some of these issues. And so could you please, before we go into some of my questions, just in the simplest terms possible for just folks who are listening, for myself, how do you define critical race theory? Because our listeners are hearing this and they want to know how to be ready and appropriate in their response.
Well,
and so how do we define that?
sure. But let me just first start by giving you a little bit of a context. And that is
Yes.
the first article that I wrote on critical race theory was published in 1995. So we're talking 26 years ago. So
Wow.
this
is not new.
recent phenomenon, and I'm late, right? I'm late because I come in education. The scholars who have done the work in law are almost 40 years. I mean, they're certainly at least 35 years of doing this work. But I define it as a theoretical framework for explaining racial disparity. Now, someone might ask, well, why do you need that? We've always had a way to explain the disparity. From 1619 to the mid 20th century, the explanation has been biological or genetic. In other words, Black people are just not as good. Something's wrong with them. Their brains are not as good. Everything about them is less than that. We even had a whole field known as eugenics that explains the notion that this group is better than that group. By the mid 20th century, we start moving towards what I would call the equal opportunity explanation. But the reason that Black people don't have what white folks have, the reason why there are disparities is that Black people lack equal opportunities. But it turns out that every time we offer an equal opportunity, we roll it back. So we have the Brown decision, that's an equal opportunity, separate is not equal. But then you start having cases in the Nixon administration, whether it's Milliken, whether it's Rodriguez, just a bunch of cases eating away at that. We had the Voting Rights Act. What's happening now? It's being rolled back. We had the Civil Rights Act being rolled back. We had affirmative action. Each of these gets rolled back. what critical race theory says is, no, the reason the disparities exist is because there is something baked into our system that makes things unequal over and over again. So that's very different from saying that my white neighbor is doing X to me. That's not what it's saying. What it's saying is when I go into the bank and when my white neighbor goes into the bank, we're going to be treated differently in terms of whether or not who gets the loan, maybe what the conditions might be. And I give people a very concrete example. My father came out of World War II, and like many GIs, he wanted to buy a house for his family. Houses at that time were going at about $8,000. So you know, it's been a long time ago. His white peers came out wanting to do the same thing and bought their homes in what was then becoming known as Levittown. So there's a Levittown outside of New York in Nassau County. There's a Levittown outside of Philadelphia. The clause in the covenants of Levittown, clause 25, reads as follows: no person other than someone of the Caucasian race may purchase, lease, or live in a Levitt house. So my dad could not, even though he had the money, he couldn't get a Levittown house. His white peers could. They both served the nation. They both were in World War II. Now you might say, well, that was back then. True. $8,000, $60 a month in mortgage. In some ways that sounds equal. Here's the real catch though, Dr. G. Today, the home that my father purchased is worth about $93,000. That Levitt home is worth $565,000. So you want to talk about wealth accumulation?
Yes, yes.
You know, so that's what critical race theory gets at. It wasn't that the individual GI was racist. It's that the system that they're both going into prohibited my father from even purchasing a home that would allow him to accumulate wealth at the same rate as that person. So that's what we're trying to get people to understand: systems of racism, systems of discrimination that are baked in. It's not about pointing a finger saying, oh, you did this, or you should feel guilty about that. Guilt is a pretty useless emotion, quite frankly.
Right.
What we want people to see is the way things are organized that continue to place Black folks sort of one down in every circumstance. We also want them to understand that it's important for us to be able to tell our stories. So one of the tenets of critical race theory is what's called a counter storytelling. That yes, you have this story, but let us tell you this other story that explains it differently. And we're never asking anybody, oh, just accept critical race theory whole cloth. We want you to interrogate it like you would any theory. And finally, I just want to be clear, nobody in PK-12 is teaching anything around critical race theory. So the arguments that we are seeing in town hall meetings and school board meetings are spurious. Most K-12 teachers don't really even understand the theory. And why should they? Since it's typically taught in law school or graduate school.
That is, I'm just making notes here. That is, thank you for that, because people are assuming that it's taking over and they're fearful that I've heard the argument, white children are going to be scarred if they're taught this tomfoolery in second and third education. Now, the flip of it is, I came home and told my mother in second grade, I asked her, Mama, were we really slaves? Because my Black teacher, Mrs. Turner, who's 101, and we're still pen pals. She's been pen pal. We've been writing for 50 years. And I went to her 100th birthday last year. She didn't think to tell me in Chicago, 1969, all Black classroom, that we were descendants of slaves. She told me I was going to be the first Black president of the United States in front of the whole class. I asserted that that's what I wanted. She affirmed it. Moved to Madison, Lapham School. Mrs. Carls teaches me and a whole room full of white children that my people came from slaves. And so we're worried about scarring Black children.
So essentially what we are saying is it is all right for Black children to experience racism, but it is not all right for white children to know about it. I mean, that's what we're essentially saying.
That's basically what we're saying.
Mm-hmm.
So yes. And so why has that become such a critical and hot topic today, in light of the fact that you said legally it's probably been happening 40 years or so? You're writing about this 25, 26 years ago. Why is it such a hot topic again? And has it always been politicized as it is now?
Nobody actually knew about it. I mean, it's a red herring, a straw man. It is really the substitute for the fact that the current administration has had some policy wins. They came into office saying, we're going to jump on COVID. That's what we're going to do. And they did. Then they said, we're going to do what we can to shore up the economy. And they did. People start getting stimulus checks. We got the PPP for businesses to keep afloat. We had moratoriums on evictions. I mean, they just did some things to prop up the economy. The third thing he's now said is, he says, I'm going to get an infrastructure deal. And guess what? It's going to come to pass. Is it the whole thing that he wanted? No, but he actually got both Republicans and Democrats to sit down and say, this is what we're going to do. So if you can't win on the policy side, then you have to gin up a culture war.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to go back to another instance to help your listeners understand when I say it's not about the individuals, but it's often about the way the system is organized. Think about something that is as common as Social Security. Go back and read the first Social Security Act, because what happens is FDR is unable to get it passed until he starts taking out certain professions and occupations. So what happens? You cannot get Social Security if you are a farm laborer. Now, doesn't say if you're a farmer. You can own, if you own a farm, you're eligible for Social Security. But you're a farm laborer. So here I am from generations on both my maternal and paternal side.
Yes.
My grandparents on both sides are sharecroppers.
Yes.
They're ineligible for Social Security, even though they work from sun up to sundown.
Yes, they did.
Another profession that you cannot get Social Security is if you are a domestic.
And we know who the domestic
So you're a maid, a cook, a nanny, a chauffeur. You can't get it. Again, it's not about individual people. You're writing into the system that we are not giving these people certain things.
And so when FDR started crafting this so that it excluded farm laborers and domestics, it gained more support.
Yeah, he didn't craft it that way. That the Southern Democrats came back to him and said, you got to we're not paying all of these people. You got to pull these people out. So the only way to get it passed was with that particular compromise to ensure that those folks don't get it. And so I think of today, on the one hand, in many places, you cannot vote if you are in prison, but you get counted in the census for representation.
Yes, you do.
Okay. Again, it's not individuals. It's a system that says we're going to get more representatives. We're going to, but no, you can't vote.
So in a way, that's buying votes. So if you want the benefit of growth in your state so that you are assigned more representatives in Congress, again, I just want to stress that. And folks, I've been working in the area of reentry for 15 years, unofficially for decades. Even when you come out of prison and you have you're a felon, in some cases you still can't vote. Some states you lose your rights all together. And I have folks who I've worked with in my organization, Nehemiah, who have gotten off paper and were not notified by the state of Wisconsin that their voting rights had been reinstated. So they didn't even know that they could vote, but yet they were counted in the census, but can't vote on how or who goes to Congress and how those dollars are spent.
Exactly.
And again, you can't do this without governmental buy-in.
Right.
When you talked about your father wanting to buy a home, those laws are written into FHA, a Federal Housing Authority law. I mean, that's federal. Those are federal programs, folks. That's not.
And remember that Jacob Levitt built tens of thousands of homes. At that time, there's no one person with that kind of money. All of that is federally subsidized.
Yes.
So here is the government upholding literally clause 25. If you go back and look, for example, at the early housing projects, the government built segregated housing projects. There were projects for Black people and projects for white people. So we see over and over as critical race theorists, we're trying to take a long view and say, what is it that the system has supported that maintains disparity?
This is Jesse Mopan, originally from Port Townsend, Washington, currently living in Madison, Wisconsin. I listen to Black Like Me because racism and white supremacy are very powerful forces at work in our society today, which I'll never understand through my own lived experience as a white person. I feel like it's important to support you so that you don't have to rely on corporate donors and you can stay true to your message. And I heard about you through word of mouth. Thanks and keep it up.
Now in its 5th season, the award-winning Black Like Me podcast has a reach throughout the U.S. and over 100 countries around the world. This amazing team of people here in Madison, Wisconsin are dedicated to changing the conversation surrounding race. When you sign up to support Black Like Me as a patron, you support the creation of better quality content and a better society. You help to plant the seeds for a different and better tomorrow. By going to patreon.com/blacklikeme and signing up at any of the levels offered, you are not only signing up to make a monthly donation, you are also joining a growing community of people interested in engaging the issue of race with a raw, unprecedented honesty. As a patron of the podcast, you will have access to exclusive content like extended interviews, bonus rants, and video chats with Dr. G. You will also have a chance to join the conversation that other patrons are already having with Dr. G about race in America. To become a patron of the show, go to patreon.com/blacklikeme or see the link in our show notes. And for as little as $2 a month, you can support these important conversations and the work that Dr. G is doing.
Do you think, Dr. Gloria, the folks who want to stop this line of teaching and education, do they really believe that these things didn't happen, or are they attempting to be shrewd and pull the wool over people's eyes? I'm just wondering, are people that oblivious to history, or are they that deviant, or some days is it all the above?
Yeah, it sounds like all of the above, because what I will tell you is that anytime you have a conversation about race, you're going to, it's such a hot button in this society that we don't have a way to sit down and talk civilly about it when we are on opposite sides of it. I mean, I can make a case for you that Frederick Douglass was a critical race theorist. If you read the 4th of July speech, he's really talking about what to the slave is the 4th of July. So the question that I think that teachers are up against is not so much about whether or not they understand critical race theory, is what can I teach about race? What I've been trying to get people to understand, I actually have a conference coming up this month on the Tulsa massacre.
Sure.
Is that Tulsa is not a one-off. And
Correct.
Typically people want you to teach it that way, like this one horrible thing happened. No, Tulsa is a part of a series of things that begins around 1913 to almost culminating in Tulsa in places like Elaine, Arkansas, Rosewood, Florida, Detroit, Chicago. I mean, we had close to, Longview, Texas. We had close to 100 riots around the post-World War I era. And so Tulsa is one of many. It's a pattern of behavior. So when January 6th occurs, and I have people call, friends calling, say, can you believe this is happening? I'm like, yeah, I can, because it's part of a pattern. Go back to the 1898 Wilmington, North Carolina election that didn't come out the way racists wanted it to come out. They staged a coup. They're like, no, you're not going to be our local representative. No, you're not going to be our mayor or city council member, and took over. So, you know, I was a history teacher, so I'm always looking across the broad swath of things.
Right.
I can take you back to the 1700s to Shays' Rebellion, and you see a pattern of when white folks don't get what they want, they're not afraid to react in ways that are violent. So Shays' Rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion, the Wilmington coup, the Red Summer, all the way leading up to Tulsa, is a pattern of behavior that says we are entitled to have what we want, when we want it, how we want it. And so January 6th for me is not an anomaly. It's been, you know, there's been some time, but January 6th kind of comes for me off of what happened in Charlottesville. You know, we start to see these, you know, staunch white supremacists saying, we're going to have what we want, and we don't care what you say or what you think. And then to have people sitting in Congress to pretend as if that was not horrific on January 6th, to not be appalled by it. I mean, the one credit that I will give to Joe Biden is he said, I wasn't interested in running for president, but when I looked at Charlottesville, I was appalled. So that at least his conscience is pricked in a way that says, we have to do something.
Right. More than just saying there are good people and bad people on both sides. And so what you're saying from your own lived experiences, Dr. Ladson-Billings, and also from what you know and have taught as a former history teacher, is that we have not evolved very much in terms of race relations. And within the white community, there's not been a whole lot of evolution, because you talked about the Whiskey Revolt and you talked about these other things that took place in Rosewood. And so the January 6th thing for many people may feel new, and they can't believe that America's taken this huge step backwards to have such an egregious act upon federal soil against our capital. But you're arguing, you all, every time there's been advancement by people of color, from even during Reconstruction and how people have responded to Black people voting in the South, there's always been this major pushback against the progress of people of color.
Yes, and that we have squandered opportunities to work in coalition.
Yes.
See, in the post-slavery era, if working class white people had combined with the formerly enslaved Black people, they would have formed such a powerful political force that we would not be in this same space. Their interests were closer. At least their economic and political interests were closer. But what you see among the white working class is the carrot of whiteness. You know, if you come over here with us, you can be white. That is important that you stay white. And so that's, you know, that's a missed opportunity.
Yes.
For the society, because we could have been so much better around race relations. I remind people all the time, race is not something that Black people ever thought of. So don't be mad at us by critiquing it. We did not come here as racialized people. We came here in 1619 as over 100 different ethnic groups. We were Wolof, we were Igbo, we were, you know, Fulani, we were Dahomey, we were Mende. I mean, those of us who have done this DNA thing, we look at this and say, oh my goodness, I'm this and I'm this and I'm this. It was not until we got to these shores that there is a creation of a category called Black, that now all of a sudden we're there. And that category is only created for one purpose: to justify enslavement.
And I think that's important for people to understand. When a few years ago, a group of they were called the Visiting African Scholars, came here from about 21, 22 countries in Africa to visit the campus in Madison and to probably establish some type of exchange program. And I met with a group of them, and we're talking about race relations and what it feels like as a Black American. And one gentleman who's from I forgot what city city is from, what country is from. He said, but where I'm from, he said, we just think of ourselves, I'll just use Ghana, as Ghanaian. We don't call ourselves Black or think of Black. We're Ghanaian. He said, so we have not been racialized the way American Blacks are. So we're talking about how some of our experiences have been really different. I love what you stress, particularly for our white listeners who are engaging in these kinds of conversations with their friends and family. Black people did not focus on race, nor did we create the construct of whiteness, because we didn't create the construct of Blackness. It was created to be determined who would be the working class, the enslaved class, who would be excluded from services, from benefiting from the wealth of this country, and who had access. If you're white, you could sit here, drink here, go to the bathroom here, get loans here. So it's important for folks who are listening to understand these issues and these dynamics around race were created centuries ago in order to create the reality that we have today.
Right. I have a former professor who I just love her to death. Her name is Professor Sylvia Winter, who I encountered as a graduate student at Stanford. And I remember one thing I loved about Stanford is that when you did your programs, they gave you plenty of space to take what I would call sort of fun courses, because they wanted you to do that.
Sure.
Very few graduate programs do this. So they would say, oh, take a tennis course. Oh, no, take the sailing course. And I think I had signed up for the sailing course, but the sailing course is iffy because Stanford doesn't actually have a lake. The lake gets created if there's enough rain that season, because they do have this sort of basin, and then it fills up, and then you have a lake. Well, I happened to be there during a drought, so I couldn't take a sailing course. So I chose this course called From Afro-Am. I love, this is stuff I love. I looked at the reading list. The name of the course was The Afro-American in Fact and Fiction. And I went to the bookstore to see what books they were. And it was like, oh, I'd read all of these books, right? Frederick Douglass narrative, Uncle Tom's Cabin, Invisible Man. I mean, I'd read all of this stuff. So I'm like, this is going to be cool. I'm going to take the course, and I'm going to enjoy going back through reading this course. And, this is going to be an easy A for me. Well, I will tell you, after the first class meeting, I said to myself, I obviously haven't read these books, because her mind was so expansive. And one of the things that she talks about is who gets included in the circle of humanity. And we were excluded from the circle of humanity. So if you don't get in the circle, then there's all kinds of things that can be done to you. And you can do it to people without any sort of moral concern, because after all, they're not human. We're outside the circle. And I think that reference comes from a Jewish woman who had written some stuff about the Holocaust, that's essentially what the Germans did to the Jews. They put them outside the circle of humanity. It's what we did to indigenous people. We put them outside the circle, and we used religion to put them out there.
Yes, we did.
Because if you go back to, the Columbian exploration and the exploration of Europeans into the Americas, they were conflicted, because remember, the church is funding a lot of this stuff.
Yes.
And what the explorers said, well, what should we do with these people? Well, here's what the church said. And at this time we're talking the Catholic Church, but that's who was in power.
The Vatican.
But the Vatican says, listen, if you tell them the gospel and they accept it, then you may not remove them from the land. But if you declare the gospel to them and they don't accept it, then you have every right to remove them. Well, here's what the explorers do. They show up and they tell them the gospel, but they tell them the gospel in Latin. So I don't know what you're saying. right? I have no idea
Right.
what's coming out of your mouth. And
Give me
so
that
that
land.
was the rationale that, well, they don't accept the gospel, therefore they're savages, therefore we can take this land. And so this placing people outside the circle of humanity is something that that human beings do all the time. When we have no compassion for suffering in a country other than our own, those people are outside the circle of humanity. And in some ways, we saw it up close in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina, that we realized,
Yes.
you know what, those people have been placed outside the circle of humanity. I was actually in London when Katrina happened. When I turned on the TV, I will confess to you, I said, what country is that? I could
Lord.
not believe that
That was
was the US.
what Dr. Gloria, when I used to be a bank teller when I was an undergrad. Is how I got part of how way I've got through college. And I was trained as a bank teller that if I were ever robbed, to talk to the bank robber. If I were ever robbed at gunpoint, I was trained to pull the bait money and all of that. They said, if you don't talk to the bank robber, they will equate you to an ATM, or you and I both say a time machine, take your money everywhere. They said, but if you talk to them and say, don't hurt me, I'm a student, I live with my parents, I've got a future, it reminds them of your humanity. Because the bank robber is trying to take you outside the circle, because it is easier to take you as a hostage or put a slug in your head if you are silent and they can say you're just a dispenser of money. And so we were trained to put ourselves back in the circle so that it would save our lives. And so that's the analogy I make to what you're saying, because bankers knew that if you are considered outside of the circle by that bank robber, you might end up dead. So put yourself in the circle by talking. But we're also talking about folks who could not put themselves in the circle. So for eons, they've been outside, the children are outside, and they inherit outsideness. And that's what we're dealing with.
Exactly. And I think one of the things that people don't know about critical race theory is the degree to which critical race theory looks for a concept that it calls interest convergence. Its argument is Black folks and other people of color will never get ahead unless, or never advance, say, in the system, unless they can do something that allows white folks to advance also. So one of the ways that critical race theorists look at the Brown decision is to say, it really isn't about education. It's about foreign policy. Because you have to, once again, place it in context. It's 1954. It's post-World War II. We are in a Cold War, and the Soviet Union and the US are fighting for non-aligned countries. One of the ways that the Soviet Union is grabbing these countries is by showing the world the way in which the US is treating Black people. So it's showing the dogs being sick. It's showing the water hoses. And so what the US wants out of Brown is a unanimous decision, which they get. So they can say to the world, look, no, that's not true. That's not who we are in principle. So that's the larger society interest. Our interest as Black people is we want our kids to get some decent education. That's an interest convergence. And if you ever read Derek Bell's work, he often does, he'll show you how these things come together. There's a wonderful story I like, counter story that he develops called The Chronicle of the Sacrificed Black Children. And in that chronicle, these Black kids are supposed to desegregate a white school. The white community is up in arms. They are rabid. They're protesting. They're going to be picketing if these kids try to come and get in our school. The night before the kids are supposed to come, they disappear. Nobody can find the Black kids. The Black community is crying, where are our children? They're searching. The white community is celebrating. And days go on and we can't find these. All the Black children are gone. White community is saying, hey, we got a victory. But as time goes on, the federal government says, yeah, but we sent you all that desegregation money, so you got to send that back because you don't actually have anybody to segregate with. oh, you got to get rid of them buses. You pay for them buses, but no, you got to fire them bus drivers because there's nobody to bus.
Wow.
You got to fire those DSEG consultants and that professional development that you had set up because there is no. So you start seeing how much it's costing. Even the little corner stores are saying, oh man, we got all this candy and inventory. These kids not coming. This is costing us money. So the story ends up with the white community coming over to the Black community and say, hey, we're going to help you find these kids. Now,
Wow.
the idea that Bell is trying to show you is that it's never just Black folks are never the only beneficiaries of civil rights legislation. It's the same thing with affirmative action. It was originally just around race, but within a year, it became race and gender. And if you run the numbers, the major beneficiaries are white women. Okay, so do they live on a place called White Women Island? I don't think so. They live for the most part with white men and white children. I cannot imagine that these white husbands or partners are saying, I don't want to use your affirmative action money. You can't contribute that to the household.
Don't bring that Negro money up in my house.
Right. So here is this money that is flowing through this community. So that's one of the things that critical race theory is asking people to look at, that look, it's not just something that happens and benefits Black folks. If you propose a civil rights piece of legislation, it invariably helps white folks. Exactly. Another one of his stories is called The Black Crime Cure. It's a crazy story because he always makes them as chronicles. And this is a story about some Black gangbangers who, for whatever reason, stumble upon a cave. And in the cave, there are these shiny little jewels. And I don't know how it happens, but somebody puts one of the jewels in their mouth and swallows it. And then they all start doing it. And they all stop committing crime. Well, they stop committing crime. And the city is like, well, we don't need all these police officers because our crime level has plummeted. We don't need this big jail we were planning. Well, we don't need all these courts. We don't need these public defenders. So the police follow the kids to see where they're going, and they find the cave and they blow it up. Because indeed, the crime cure was costing them. I mean, again, they are fanciful stories, but they're designed to make you think about who actually benefits from this system the way it is. And I know that in 2008, right after Barack Obama was elected, my students, they were ecstatic, right? I go into class at the university and they're just all excited. And they said to me, Dr. Ladson-Billings, you don't seem that excited. And I said, well, I was a critical race theorist before he got elected. And I'm a critical race theorist now that he is elected. And I can give you a critical race theory explanation for why he got elected. And it has to do with an interest convergence. People forget we were in an economic free fall. And McCain really signaled more of the same. People were looking at their pocketbooks. So that was the interest convergence. Black people wanted a Black president. White people didn't want their 401ks to disappear. So, and I guess what I'm saying is, I'm not saying you have to accept that explanation. I'm saying it becomes a way, a theoretical way of thinking about, well, why are certain things happening?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great point. Dr. Gloria, when you were talking about how affirmative action benefited white women and women-owned businesses, and many of them, excuse me, you're certain, had husbands or partners who weren't turning that money down, those white women did not have to prove anything other than they were women. You look at Black women who receive governmental support, like through, as you look at the movie Claudine with Diane Carroll and James Earl Jones. Remember the scene when the social worker came by? She had to hide her toaster and a
And the
TV
iron, right?
and an iron and her man
Hmm.
all in the same closet because she had to prove that she was not in a long-standing relationship with a man in order to get governmental support. White women did not have to prove anything, that she was in dire straits, that she was not married, that she did not have any support of a man. So he could be a bank executive and she could still get money to open up her own business and double up on her income and did not have to prove anything. Those things really happened.
Hmm.
The white woman was not scrutinized to receive governmental support the way Black women did, and it wreaked havoc on the Black family as well. So, for my friends, for my supporters who are listening, this is a real rich lesson in things that happened 3, 4, 5 decades ago, how they're having an impact on
Right.
things today. They might not have said in 2021 this will be the result of our actions, but they knew that what they were doing was not going to help the Black community, and they did it anyway. And here we are, and we're not abdicating any of our own responsibility to teach our children, lead our children, be committed to our homes. We talk about this in the pulpits. We talk about this in our homes. We talk about abiding by rules and the importance of voting and education. So we don't want white people getting it twisted that we don't talk about these things. But in spite of everything that we do and teach to our children, these systemic realities still are real. And this is where
Right.
we need white people who want to be allies. We need you to understand this.
Right.
That
I,
you're
I
not.
wrote an article for a journal, and I put a statement in there about how the government was complicit in maintaining segregation through the Interstate Highway Act. And
Oh,
one of
yes.
the editors said, "Oh, well, you can't say that." And I said, "Okay, do I need to get you the citations? Because this is true. Yes, I can say this." And so I was able to go back and show them how, communities like in New Orleans, that whole Clybourne overpass just totally bisects the community and destroys that Black business area. When they started building back Tulsa, Greenwood,
Mm-hmm.
they bisect the community. So part of Greenwood is on the other side of the freeway. They literally cut the community in half. And one of the things that I think critical race theorists try to do is say, let's look at the data and what are some other possible interpretations of the data. So one example I think is a good one is the Moynihan report. Everybody
Mm-hmm.
remembers the Moynihan report. Moynihan found that 25% of Black households were led by women. So he talked
Right.
about that, created this matriarchy and a kind of
Mm-hmm.
pathology among Black families. Now, the part of the data that are correct is that 25% of the households in the early 70s were led by women, Black women. Here's the different interpretation. Before that, 1968, you had close to 80% of Black households, two-parent households.
Mm-hmm.
Then what happens? Well, there's a policy shift. And you alluded to it when you talked about Claudine. You have the Aid to Family with Dependent Children that explicitly says you cannot have a man in that household. So now you have Black mothers trying to make a choice. Do I have this man in this household, or do I get enough money to take care of these kids?
Right.
That is not even an option for a Black mother. I've got to
Right.
take care of these kids. So a different interpretation for me as a social scientist about the Moynihan report is, rather than asking what is wrong with these families, that 25% of them are headed by Black women households, the question that I might ask is, what is happening in our society
Yes.
that Black families are telling us that we need to get ahead of? And why do I say that? Because today, 25% of all households are headed by single parent, mostly women. So instead of looking at Black families as the pathology, what if we had looked at them as the bellwether, the barometer, that, you know what, they're telling us something.
The canary in the mines.
The canary in the mine shaft. It's the same thing with COVID. Instead of saying, oh, well, these people are out here smoking or they're drinking or they got diabetes, they don't eat right. What is happening to these people that they are dying at this rate that we need to do? And in some ways we did do it. We said, you know what, put on a mask, social distance, wash your hands. But that's typically not what we do. Rather than look at Black people in many ways as indicators of something that's happening in the larger society, we blame them.
And pay the price later by not on more than one front. Man, just as I begin to wind up our time, I'm loving this. During each season, Dr. Gloria, I'll have a discussion with someone who may be an educator or a great legal mind or an artist, and I'll ask them would they consider being sort of my special correspondent from time to time, coming back. So one of the things I'd like to ask you is that as key things come up around education or teacher training, I would love to bring you back just to get your take on it. But just quickly before we finish up, who is your most memorable teacher growing up?
Oh, that's an easy question. That person is a woman by the name of Ethel Benn, Benn. Ethel Benn changed my life.
You're smiling before you said her name. You started smiling.
She's my fifth grade teacher, who I didn't want to be in her classroom.
Really?
Went there first because she was old. Now, as I think back on it, she's probably younger than I am right now. But I didn't want her. I wanted the white lady down the hall with the ponytail and the high heels. Miss Ben was your stereotypical hair fixed like mine is right now, drawn back in a bun, granny glasses, and she wasn't making no fashion statement with them. A flowered dress, cotton stockings, them old lady comforter shoes. She used to put a handkerchief down in her bosom, right? But this woman was the most generous person I'd ever met. And she understood the power of education. She's the person who introduced us to W.E.B. Du Bois. I thought she was making it up. She talking about a Black man went to Harvard. I was like, no, she make that up. And she would literally place us, we'd take turns being the class sentinel, because she was teaching us out of an unauthorized text. And so the person who was a sentinel needed to look for the principal. The principal came, we knew we had to keep the school text on the desk. And when the principal came, we were supposed to turn to page 127, like we've been studying that all along, right? But she was just regaling us with this information about Black people. Now, the other thing was that she was in charge of the chorus and the school chorus. But if you were in her classroom, whether you could carry a note in a bucket, you were going to be in that. The whole class was in the chorus. Now, other people from other classes could try out and audition and come, but her class students were going to be in it. And she took us around the city so that we could see a wider world. We sang everywhere, and we sang every kind of genre. Turns out she was a first lady of a church. She was a preacher's wife. We sang at a lot of churches. And I remember a couple of years ago, my husband, and he's Catholic.
Yes.
We were at church and they were singing Dona Nobis Pacem. And I was singing right along with them. And my husband looked at me and said, where did you learn that song from? Because it's a Latin song. Where did you learn that song from? I said, Miss Ben taught me that song in fifth grade. She was the reason I went ahead and studied Latin.
Really?
Yes, I studied Latin for 3 years. I'm all the way through Cicero, so, but she just made this incredible impression on me. I remember asking her one time to buy some Girl Scout cookies from me because I was in the Girl Scout troop. My mother was a Girl Scout. My mother actually started the first Black Girl Scout troop in Philadelphia.
What?
Yes. Yeah. So when my
Wow.
daughter was in Girl Scouts here in Madison, I gave her a copy of the picture of my mom, my aunt, and some of my mother's best friends. And there's all these little Black children and brownies,
Wow.
brownies and Girl Scouts to take with her to her Girl Scout meeting. And her, this is all white troop here in Madison.
Sure.
And the kids, they couldn't get over it. They're like, they're all Black. Yes, they are.
Yes.
My mother
Yes.
ran it through her church, and she went to the church mothers. And you couldn't
Mhm.
get in the troop without being interviewed by my mom. That is,
Yeah.
the parents had to be interviewed. This is what we
Sure.
will expect of you to support these. And then my mother went to the church mothers and she said, I want all of my girls to have a uniform, every last one of them. And the ones that can't afford it, the mother's board, y'all gonna have to come up with this money because I want them to know
Wow.
that they're Girl Scouts, right? So, I mean, to have these sort of pivotal experiences with Black women.
Yes.
And Miss Ben, so I asked her to buy these cookies from me. And she said, oh, honey, you wait till the last minute. I already bought cookies. Okay, I was done. Like, okay, you already bought them. I'm late. She said, I can only buy a few. She bought 11 boxes of cookies from me. That was her few. Because she'd bought probably 20 boxes from somebody's. And, back in those days, you had milk and cookies. You usually had milk and graham crackers.
Mhm.
We had milk and Girl Scout cookies for the rest of the year because she gave them all back to us. She just taught me so much about generosity and about what it really meant to love Black people. And, she changed my life. She's the reason that I decided to study history, even though I was much more a science person. I thought I was going to be a chemist at one time because I was really good at chemistry. But it was Miss Ben sort of in the back of my mind, constantly telling me, we are from a very, very special people. We are a people who have overcome this. We are a people who have led in that. And you didn't hear that everywhere. The two places I heard it was from Mrs. Ben and my father. My father, with his third grade education, was the one who told me, no matter what people say about Paul Robeson, they're probably lying. And I was like, what? Because Robeson, of course, was persona non grata in the McCarthy era. But he turns out to be one of the most magnificent Renaissance people the world has ever seen. And one of the real pleasures of my life is Robeson, as he, in his latter years, as he was literally dying, lived around the corner from my mother at his sister's house. And so I went to the house and knocked on the door and I said, I don't want to disturb Mr. Robeson, but can you please tell him that he has a dear, dear devotee living right around the corner from him. And I just want to say thank you. Just amazing folks like that, that kind of just change your course of life. They just change your trajectory.
I love that. I love it. My last question, Dr. Gloria, is if you already are, in my opinion, an educational czar, but let's just say if you were the national educational czar and you could wave a wand and make something happen, anything that you wanted, what would you require of every person who teaches Black children?
So I've been saying this to teachers here in Madison all year because everybody wants to know, quote, what to do. The most radical thing we could do is to teach Black children to the highest quality. Can I tell you that that's a revolutionary act?
Yes, ma'am.
Don't worry about, did I insert this person or did I tell them about that? Just, treat them like you're teaching an advanced placement class.
Yes.
Teach them like you're teaching an honors class. If we literally lifted them up and that we use the assets that they bring with them. You know how you started this podcast off asking me different phrases and experiences? Yes. Guess what? Our kids come to school with this stuff. They come to school knowing certain things.
Yes, they do.
And that becomes a wonderful place. You don't have to explain to a kid what a proverb is. What you say to them is, every shut eye ain't sleep, right? They know what that means, because my mama said that. Or any number of phrases. Don't let your mouth write a check your behind can't cash. You know what? Everything you want to teach about similes and metaphors, our kids have that. I do an activity with teachers sometimes, and I ask them, imagine that Black people are just coming to the US. There has been no slavery, no Civil War, no civil rights movement, no Reconstruction. They're coming like every other immigrant group. What kind of America do they encounter? And it is amazing to me how many things that white teachers will tell me, oh, well, we would have, the music. I can't imagine what the music would be like. Or the fashion. I can't know. I mean, they just can list thing after thing after thing that we have woven into this American fabric. And then I say to them, your children are bringing that with them. Those things that you think are so important to making America America, Black children bring that with them every single day.
Yes, yes. That's great. That is so great, Dr. Gloria. Listen, you all, my very special guest has been Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, and she's known all over the world, prior to the pandemic and even probably a little bit during it. She's just been in tremendous demand. You'll see pictures of her saying, oh, I'm on my way to Ireland, or I'm on my way to London. I'm on my way here and there. I'm receiving an award. I'm speaking here. And so we are so proud of her in our community. But I also love the fact that when I'm involved in community projects, all I have to do is call her and ask her for her help, for her support. And she is there for so many of us up and coming, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but younger leaders. She's there to help encourage us. And so just as revered as she is in the academy, she is in our community as well. And she epitomizes the Wisconsin idea of taking the brilliance of such a wonderful institution and sharing it with communities in need. And so, Dr. Gloria, it means the world to me to be able to close out this season with you. And so I just want to thank you again for being my very special guest. And I just want to say to folks, as always, I ask you to lean in, educators, students who are education majors, folks who are in grad school to be teachers and policy makers and curriculum developers. Share this podcast with them, share this episode with them so that they can begin to think differently, because there is something that our white allies can do to help Black and brown children. Post this, make your comments, subscribe, go to wherever you download these episodes and leave a comment if you want to do things to help this cause. And as always, click the Patreon link because it helps us to continue to bring this podcast to us. And so as always, I want you to lean in. I want you to learn. I want you to comment. I want you to share. Then I want you to be a part of the change that you really want to see in this community. Dr. Gloria, thank you again for being my guest.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Black like me. Black like.
This has been another exciting episode of Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G. Special shout out to Eli and to Jeremy, who are my engineers and my editors on this, to Don Thornton, who is my podcast manager, who makes sure that we line all of this up, to Corey Saffold, who is responsible for that exciting new jingle, that Black Like Me jingle. I'm so excited about that. And to vocals by Marcus Fleming.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.
Black like me.